Alright, y'all, I'm not going to waste too much of your time on this, but I'm hearing some crazy theories about the DoorDash driver that delivered food to Xana Knodel literally minutes before she was murdered. And I've tried to just ignore all of these theories that are coming out because they have no basis in any kind of fact whatsoever. Well, this one, for some reason, tonight is just getting on my last nerve. My very last nerve. All right, so there seems to be two theories. Firstly, that the DoorDash driver is the killer. And secondly, that Bryan Kohberger is the DoorDash driver. Whether or not he's the killer, he's still the DoorDash driver. So we see here, page 3. Right, of the probable cause affidavit. So Dylan and Bethany made statements during the interviews indicating the occupants of the King Road residence were home by 2 a.m. and asleep, or at least in their rooms, by approximately 4 a.m., with the exception of Xana, who received a DoorDash order at the residence at approximately 4 a.m. So we don't know specifically to the minute what time this person arrived. This is the thing that people seem to be ignoring. Law enforcement identified the DoorDash driver who reported this information. Alright, so DoorDash driver rings in and says, listen, I delivered DoorDash at 4 a.m. the early hours of the morning of that murder over in King Road. And they say, right, okay, let's check out your story because you're at a murder scene now, so we're going to check out your story. All right, so they're going to identify that person because somewhere along the line there's got to be some communication between the driver and Jack in a Box. Now, the driver is working for DoorDash. They go and pick the food up from Jack in a Box to go and deliver it. The Jack in a Box, I think the nearest one is Pullman. So, alright, they're pulling out all the security cameras and everything anyway because Kohberger lives in Pullman. Jack in a Box might not necessarily know the name of the person who picked up that food for King Road. But the chances are that DoorDash driver is going to go into Jack in a Box to pick up the food. Jack in a Box will have a security camera, won't they? So did that security camera pick up Bryan Kohberger taking the food, and it would be the white Elantra that was delivering the DoorDash. Kohberger, I don't know, puts on a different voice to ring in to throw the cops off the scent. If he's the killer, so he's delivered the DoorDash because he's working for DoorDash now, right? So he just happens to pick up this order because maybe he's rung this order in. It's all, you know, a bit up in the air as to how this order gets put in there anyway, because that would be quite elaborate. So Bryan Kohberger, working for DoorDash, rings in to place an order for 1122 King Road, goes and picks it up because he's the DoorDash driver, and then goes and murders 4 people. And then the following day or whenever rings the cops and says, look, I am the DoorDash driver, but I'm not the killer, honest. All right. So that would mean if Bryan Kohberger was both the DoorDash driver and the killer, that there'd only be one vehicle on King Road, or Queen Road. It's Queen Road at the front. The probable cause affidavit tells us that the white Elantra is caught all around the neighbourhood, right? Doing all sorts of things all around the neighbourhood. And then tries to come up here, whatever, has to do a 3-point turn and then come back. That same camera, there's a camera here, wherever that camera was, will also have caught the DoorDash driver. So if Bryan Kohberger is both the DoorDash driver and the killer, then there'd only be one vehicle. So they'd get that person as soon as they identified that the Jack in a Box person, the person who went in to pick up the DoorDash from Jack in a Box, was Bryan Kohberger. Right? They'd get that, wouldn't they? They'd know that, wouldn't they? And that would be in the PCA. Now, if the DoorDash driver isn't Bryan Kohberger, Bryan Kohberger isn't the killer, the DoorDash driver is, then again, there'd only be one vehicle doing the rounds that night. And that vehicle would have to look very similar to Bryan's. It would have to be a white Elantra like Bryan's. And also it would be a mighty coincidence that Bryan's phone was pinging roughly in the same direction that the car was caught on cameras. So that would be a mighty coincidence, unless the DoorDash driver stole Bryan's phone and took it on a joyride. I don't think that happened. So no, none of this makes any sense when you consider even the most modicum of logic, because the DoorDash driver will have been identified, because it says here, and they won't just taken the DoorDash driver keep ringing up and taking their word for it. They'll have gone to Jack in a Box and they'll have identified the person who picked up that order, because potentially they're a suspect, because potentially they're at a murder scene minutes before a murder. So they'll have gone to pains to identify that person. So presumably that person identified as the person who picked up the order from Jack in a Box will be in a different vehicle to the killer, because they're not, right? They're a different person. So they'd be in a different vehicle to the killer. If Bryan Kohberger was the DoorDash driver and the killer, there'd only be one vehicle. And surely it would be, instead of law enforcement identify the DoorDash driver who reported the information, it would be Mr. Kohberger also pretended to be a DoorDash driver, or worked as a DoorDash driver, so that he could get access to the property. That would be instead of that line there. The DoorDash driver is not relevant, other than being on that road at the same time, so possibly a witness, possibly a key witness. Because not only would they be able to identify the vehicle, they could also potentially identify the driver. Let me know what you think. Hopefully you see through this particular crazy theory. Bye, guys.